Hello everyone, this is Keith Lloyd, a professor of English at Kent State University Stark, and I'm so sorry I can't be there today, but I'm very excited to be a part of this panel of these excellent scholars, Ada, Eliza, and Hua. I'm sure you will get a whole lot out of their presentations. So let me just begin mine. Common composition definition of rhetoric is it's defined, of course, as you know, as observing in any given case the available means of persuasion, and he allies rhetoric with persuasion by saying that all men attempt to discuss statements and maintain them, to defend themselves and to attack others. Comparative rhetoric takes a different tack since the time of George Kennedy, noting that although Kennedy says it arises in a situation that threatens or seems to offer an opportunity to gain some advantage, he does open the door to a different global definition of rhetoric, a form of mental energy, which is really what I'm concerned with today. Comparative rhetoricians, as Lu Ming Mao and others noted, focuses on communicative practices across time and space in order to promote and practice a way of doing, knowing, and being that moves away from defining, claiming a finite set of objects of study, and that transcends borders, binaries, and biases. Comparative rhetors enact perspectives, performances that intervene in and transform the dominant rhetorical traditions, perspectives, and practices. Similarly, Ruiz and Sanchez talk in decolonizing rhetoric and composition studies. They say the false universalized notions of rhetoric that have accompanied Western modernity spread across the hemisphere, that we are to resist those things. As Steve Alvarez says in that book, delinking entails the ability to reread the world, the opportunity to rewrite it. Francis McNeill puts it, defying the fictitious tale of the Eurocentric worldview being the only story, therefore the only truth, the superior truth. The one story, one truth, one worldview leaves us blind to the complexities of our world and the diverse realities of people in it. In short, we need a different definition of rhetoric in a global context that delinks rhetoric from Greco-Roman practices. So, presentation goals to define and delink rhetoric from comparative, decolonized, and global perspectives in such a way that the new definition promotes positive and hopeful rhetoric worldwide. To summarize various multivalent rhetorics that promote hopeful rhetorical practices, and to expand our understanding of rhetorical motive amenable to a global context. So to begin, rhetoric is no longer a Greek word. Because of colonization and globalization, it's a common word in world Englishes, as well as its translated forms, such as the Japanese rhetorical and some of these other words that you see written here. None of these is an exact translation, and all of them in some sense already delink from Greek rhetoric in their various contexts. If we recognize that the term rhetoric is a global concept, scholars can delink it also from cliches like rhetoric versus reality or rhetoric as persuasive propaganda. As James Crosswhite notes, rhetoric is not a debased kind of communication. It is the reality of all communication. It leads us to experiencing the world in some particular ways. To accommodate this need to rewrite or redefine or delink the term rhetoric, this presentation defines it as the study of the shaping of the relation of the what message and the how delivery of communication in human environments, which I established in an earlier work. This presentation explores a little bit the why of the what and how, rhetorical motivation from a broad, interwoven perspective. We're exploring rhetorics in order to redefine rhetoric within comparative and decolonial rhetorical context. This presentation samples perspectives on the motivation for rhetoric from comparative rhetoric, decolonial rhetoric, feminist rhetoric, and other contemporary rhetorics that delink both rhetoric and its motives from the dominant Euro-American narrative and open possibilities to rewrite them from a more global, applicable perspective. To begin, ironically, we have to step back and think, where does the Western thinking come from in terms of when we gauge things as rhetoric, not rhetoric, or non-Western rhetorics, Euro-American rhetorics? So we learn as children that a cat is a cat and a dog is a dog. There's no cat dog. It's based in the idea of Aristotelian laws that are foundational to Euro-American thought. So there's the law of non-contradiction. Propositions are either true or false, and the law of the excluded middle. Either a proposition is true or its negation is. These are handy concepts to know for law, but not always useful in terms of actually how we make decisions and how we express ideas. So we look to Lofty Zeta, born in Baku, Azerbaijan, and was in the Soviet Union at the time. He revealed a different way to look at binaries, one already evident in human language. So beginning in 1965, he began something called fuzzy logic, which is actually more accurate than Aristotelian logic. He noted that when human beings make decisions, we seldom decide the issue in a simple either-or manner, evidenced by all the words we have for things between opposites, like most, times, often, seldom, and never. Zeta also dissolved the Western emphasis on linear thinking. He noted that when we make decisions, something like what to eat for dinner, we use multiple scales. How hungry are you? What did you have for lunch? What are you most desiring? What do the others involved want? We weigh all these factors in seconds within a multivalent sphere of decision. In short, he decolonized logical reasoning. So on the basis of that, I want to think about rhetoric in a multivalent sense. The what and the how allow for a multivalent global rhetorics, so we need not be locked into binaries like argumentation versus persuasion, rhetoric versus reality, Western versus non-Western rhetorics. We're not locked into applying Greco-Roman concepts and not locked into a singular view of rhetoric and its motives. We can move past the idea that we need to search for specific parameters, meaning-making, in the pursuit of global rhetorical practices. So, given this, we can approach global rhetorics as Lu Ming Mao suggests. How does the rhetoric of this non-Western approach arise? What meaning does it convey? How does its discursive field get mapped out and become realized? And how does this rhetoric shape and inhabit the world? Believe it or not, I'm going to begin a multivalent perspective and a delinking with a traditional discussion of Kenneth Burke. Now, the reason I think that he delinks is because he brings two concepts to Greco-Roman rhetoric that take it a whole different direction. One is identification, is when we join our interests. A is identified with B. And he says that they are motivated by strife, enmity, faction, but also identifications in the order of love. I think this expands our definition of rhetoric nicely, but it's still locked into the rhetoric's job is not just to create identifications, but to spur those involved in action to identify with B to make A consubstantial with B, a doctrine of consubstantiality. So while I think this liberates us a bit from traditional rhetoric, it still keeps us within a Euro-American Catholic Christian perspective. So I offer that Nyaya Hindu rhetoric, which I study, the rhetoric's task is to remind others we are not separate beings, which is what Burke assumes that we are, and what affects one affects all. Humans should act for the good of all rather than just the one. A rhetor is not in a separate space, mulling over how to get others to do what they want, in an Aristotelian sense, or think is best, or what is the most advantageous to the speaker. The speaker enters what they call vada, dialogue with others in a similar situation, seeking solutions to problems that are fruitful to all. Nyaya inverts Burke's role of the rhetor. While he believes that the rhetor proclaims unity for separate entities, the Nyaya rhetor might say instead, the notion that humans are apart from one another is an illusion. So identification and consubstantiation do not occur despite our separate identities. They work in concord with our essential unity. Stephen C. Combs, in his book Taoist Rhetoric, rewrites Burke's concepts from a global perspective. The Taoist rhetoric's goal is to move beyond words. For this reason, Taoists and Zen Buddhists teach through poems, stories, and analogies. These are powerful ways of looking at rhetoric that are not as often explored. The meaning lies beyond the words in the realm of mind-to-mind communication. Sonia Foss and Cindy Griffin outline the traditional rhetoric in terms of conquest and conversion. In conquest, you're winning at all costs. Conversion, you're trying to get people to do what you desire, to take on your point of view. And advisory rhetoric is non-judgmental and based in a mutual relationship of caring. Advisory rhetorics listen as much as they speak and are willing to change in response to the conversation. So this advisory already opens up our idea of rhetoric, but they go further, that there is a fourth type of rhetoric that is not directly persuasive in intent. Rather than speakers focusing on persuading, they focus on the creation of an environment that enables transformation should audience members choose to be transformed. I actually use this approach in my teaching. It is very transformative for the students once they figure out that they are actually in a space, as it says, of safety, value, and freedom through my modeling of those values in that space. Cheryl Glenn's rhetorical feminism, it's a tactic, a set of tactics, a theoretical stance that is responsive to the ideology that is feminism and to the key strategy that is feminist rhetoric. She says rhetorical feminism, anchored in hope, enacts goals that are dialogic and transactional rather than monologic and reactional, attends to provisionally marginalized audiences that may not have the power to address or resolve the exigence, employs and respects vernaculars and experiences, recognizing them as sources of knowledge, shows us ways to reshape the rhetorical appeals, including a reshaped logos based on dialogue and understanding, a reshaped ethos with roots in experience, and a reshaped pathos that values emotion, uses and respects alternative delivery systems, especially those long considered feminine, such as silence and listening. A very hopeful rhetoric that would apply to our need for a global understanding of rhetoric. Add to this James Crosswhite's deep rhetoric. Rhetoric is a way of being, and a deep rhetoric involves receptive, responsible, and responsive action. Deep rhetoric is a process, a constant transcendence beyond ourselves towards something else. This transcendence may be simply in time or in history or in language or in the pursuit of our goals or even in simple perception and thought. We also look at Thomas Rickards' ambient rhetoric. Ambient rhetoric continually tunes itself both to what is present and to what withdraws. They are the conditions that give rise to our ongoing perceptions and understandings of the world. Rhetoric does not just change the subjective states of mind, it transforms our fundamental disposition concerning how we are in the world, how we dwell. Rhetoric then accomplishes its work by inducing us to shift, at least potentially, how we dwell or see ourselves dwelling in the world. He sees rhetoric as a way of being. Rhetoricity is always the ongoing disclosure of the world, shifting our manner of being in that world so as to call for some response or action. So, I'd like to summarize this by thinking about these points as teaching points. Dominant views of history marginalize groups of people who have much to contribute to our understanding of ourselves and motivation. And Greco-Roman concepts of rhetoric are valid, but not universal. For a global understanding of rhetoric and motives, we need both Western and non-Western perspectives. And in fact, we need to dissolve that binary. Rhetoric can be delinked from Greco-Roman concepts by defining it as how we shape the what and why. Rhetorical motive is best understood as a multivalent continuum. Classrooms should include non-dominant perspectives, those elsewhere and otherwise. Burke's identity, identification, and consubstantiation are valuable perspectives, but non-Western rhetorics call into question their universality without amending for different culture, emphasis, and concepts of self and others. Feminist rhetoric can be a mindset focused not just on equality for women, but listening and responding to all marginalized voices and for analyzing and displacing and replacing as needed previously accepted and often unquestioned practices and beliefs. Nyaya Hindu rhetoric conceptualizes humans as expressions of one being. Dialogue can be vada, seeking truth together for the benefit of all. Taoist rhetoric includes the unity of opposites and the ability to communicate mind to mind. So, to sum, rhetoric is the key to our being. Rhetoric is ambient. It surrounds us. It creates us. Rhetorical study concerns how we say, what we say, as well as our sense of why we say it, our various motivations for speaking. Apologies for some of the errors in this presentation. This is more about me, what I have done, and there's the work cited. Feel free to ask questions at kslloyd@kent.edu, or any of my colleagues can forward any questions to me. Thank you for being here, and I very much look forward to hearing about this presentation.